Okay, so let's just dive right in. Picture this, a city absolutely on the brink of being wiped off the map. I mean, the enemy is literally at the gates. And in this moment of just total crushing despair, a prophet gets a command from God to make what has to be the most illogical investment of all time. This is the story of Jeremiah's field.
And this, right here, is the question that hangs over this entire story. It's the whole reason we're talking about it. When everything you know is about to be lost, when property is just hours away from being completely worthless, why in the world would you buy a plot of land? It just doesn't make any sense. You know, to really get how wild this command was, you have to feel what was happening in this moment. The mounts he's talking about, those are siege ramps. The Babylonian army is building earthen ramps to get over the city walls. This is not some distant threat. This is it. This is the final, desperate moment right before Jerusalem falls.
So, let's start by painting a picture of just how hopeless this situation really was. We're talking about a city under a full-blown, brutal siege. And the command Jeremiah gets feels like it's from another planet, completely disconnected from this grim reality.
This is what they were up against. The city was facing this three-pronged disaster. First, you had the sword. That's the constant, relentless military assault from the Chaldeans, the Babylonians. Then you had famine. People inside the walls were literally starving to death, and as if that wasn't enough, you had pestilence, disease running rampant through a trapped, weakened population. There was no way out. It was a death trap. And right there, in the middle of all that horror, Jeremiah gets this command. And you can hear the paradox in his own prayer. He's basically saying, okay, God, you told me to buy this field, even though we both know this city is already a lost cause. It's an act that makes absolutely zero human sense.
So what does Jeremiah do after he obeys this totally baffling order? Well, he doesn't just sit there confused, he turns to prayer. And not to complain, but to try and figure out what is going on.
And this really shows you the prophet's mindset. I mean, first, he does the thing. He obeys. He hands over the deed to his scribe, Baruch, so it's all official, recorded, and preserved. And only then does he go to God to try and connect this bizarre action to a divine perspective that, let's be honest, he doesn't fully get yet.
Now, here's what's so fascinating. Where does his prayer begin? It doesn't start with, "Why are you doing this to me?" It starts with, "Who are you?" He kicks things off by remembering God's history of absolute, undeniable power. He's reminding himself who he's talking to. He starts at the very beginning. I mean, the God who made the entire universe from nothing, he's probably not going to be limited by the Babylonian army, right? So this is the foundation for everything that follows. If God can create everything, then bringing a nation back from exile? Well, like the text says, there is nothing too hard for thee.
He also uses this really specific phrase, stretched out arm. And for the people of Israel, this was a huge deal. It was like a code word. It wasn't just a generic term for power. It immediately made them think of God's most famous act of intervention, parting the Red Sea and saving them from Egypt. It meant God was stepping directly into their history to do something impossible.
Jeremiah then starts thinking about these two sides of God's character. On one hand, you have this incredible loving kindness, a deep, loyal love that lasts for thousands of generations. But on the other hand, there's this unwavering justice that holds people accountable. And Jeremiah gets that both are true and both are happening right now, in this very moment.
And he just keeps coming back to it, this historical anchor, the Exodus from Egypt. It's the ultimate proof of concept. God had already rescued his people from an impossible situation against an overwhelming superpower once before. This memory is the fuel for any possible hope of a future rescue.
And look, this wasn't just some vague myth or a fairy tale. As you can see here, it was a core part of their recorded history. The miracles in Egypt, the escape through the sea, and eventually settling in the Promised Land. These were the events that defined who they were. Jeremiah is drawing on centuries of real history for strength.
Okay, but after remembering God's power and faithfulness in the past, the prayer has to come crashing back to the painful, desperate reality of the present.
And right here, we see the tragic logic of the whole situation laid bare. The cause? God gave them an incredible gift, a land flowing with milk and honey, a place of abundance. And the effect? They obeyed not thy voice. The people just turned away from the very one who had given them everything.
So this is the key. The siege isn't some random tragedy. It's not bad luck. It is the direct, foretold consequence of their own actions. Jeremiah isn't questioning God's justice here. He's actually affirming it. He understands that this disaster is the direct result of their disobedience.
Jeremiah looks at those Babylonian siege ramps, and you know what he sees? A terrible prophecy coming true. He's essentially saying, God, everything you warned us about, it's happening. Right now, just like you said it would. You see it. This actually confirms God's control over history, for better and for worse.
And this brings us right to the climax. Now that we get the history, the justice of what's happening, and the reality of the crisis, now, finally, we can understand the field.
So here we are back at the big question, but now we have the full weight of Jeremiah's prayer behind it. If this destruction is deserved, if it's unstoppable, then what in the world was the point of buying that field?
The answer is in this idea of the prophetic act. This wasn't a real estate deal. It was a living sermon. It was an action meant to communicate a message that mere words couldn't carry. It was a tangible symbol of a future that looked completely and totally impossible. And there it is. That's the real meaning. Buying that field was an act of defiant hope. It was a statement, a declaration, that the exile, the destruction, the despair, that this was not the end of the story. It was a down payment on God's promise that one day the people would come back, and life and homes and fields would have value once again.
So, what do we take away from all this? Well, for one, that faith isn't about the absence of a crisis. It's about what you do right in the middle of it. We learn that hope can sometimes look illogical, but it can be an incredibly powerful act of obedience. Remembering how God has been faithful in the past is what gives us the fuel to hope for the future. And maybe most importantly, even in our darkest moments, that's where God can plant a symbol of future restoration.
And that leaves us with one last, kind of provocative thought. When we're facing our own seemingly impossible situations, what is that small, maybe even illogical act of hope that we're being called to invest in? What is your field of hope?